Call the bylaw and policy review committee meeting for Tuesday, February 20th. Order. It is 7 o'clock on the dot. We have regrets from trustee Anisha Thomas. And to go to agenda item A2, the opening prayer. I'd like to call student trustee Nathan Nguyen to do the opening prayer.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, thank you for his Holy Spirit of season of Lent. Give us the courage and will to walk away from what is not good for us. Give us loving hearts that reach out to others in need, and give us humble souls ready to turn away from our fallen ways, ready to forgive and pray more. Your joy increase in us each day of this Lenten journey as we prepare to celebrate the glory of your risen Son, Jesus our Lord. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you very much. On to the next agenda item A3, land acknowledgement. I'd like to call on student trustee Christopher Joseph.
Hello. Okay. In the deep of winter, we acknowledge the land, regardless of all around us. The cold, the dark, the land is always there, stable, supportive, providing for our needs. And yet, it is ever a silent witness to all we do, the positive and beautiful, the unjust, now and in times past. We commit, collectively and personally, to do better in the spirit of our foundational treaty. The dish with one spoon wampum, which asks us to share the land evenly. As always, we are thankful to our local treaty partners, the Miccosukee and Anishinaabe, for showing us the way.
Thank you very much for that. On to agenda item A4, approval of the agenda. Madam Director, do I add now?
Through the chair, prior to approval of the agenda, I'm asking for a private session, an in-camera private session that would require majority of trustees to approve adding to the agenda at this time.
Thank you very much. So pending approval for the majority of trustees, Madam Director, I'd like to add L1A, an in-camera private session. Can I have, do I need a mover? Have a mover, please? Trustee Bruno Inica, thank you. Can I have a show of hands, please? All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Thank you. Okay, on to A4, approval of the agenda as amended. Can I have a mover, please? I see Darrow D'Souza, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Are there any declared interest items this evening? Seeing none. A6, approval of the Board and Bylaw Policy Review Committee meeting, October 17th, 2023. Can I have somebody move those, please? Trustee Thomas, thank you. Is it approved? Sorry, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Madam Director.
Through the chair, we're on to section B, which is the terms of reference for the Board Bylaw Policies Review Committee of 2024. These terms of reference, which are similar to the terms of references in previous years, are identified on page 17.
Thank you. Can I have a mover, please, for this? Trustee Luz de Rosario, thank you. Any opposed? All in favor? Passed. Thank you. One item also, as I'd like to mention that Trustee Herman Valoria, is he online? I don't see him there. Trustee Herman Valoria is not in attendance now. We'll mention when he is. On to section C.
Through the chair, there are no awards or delegations this evening. We move to section E, regular reports, the Ontario Catholic School Trustees Association report.
Thank you very much. Trustee Luz de Rosario, do you have a report?
Not tonight, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Trustee Mario Pascucci, do you have a report?
No report.
Thank you very much. On to E1B, good news items. Are there any good news items? Seeing none. On to section F, nothing in section F. Section G1, appropriate dress code, school uniform policy, Superintendent Vaccarino. This is found on page 19 for everybody who's doing this at home.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and continuing through you, Mr. Chair, as just noted on page 19 is a report for your consideration this evening. It's a follow-up to a presentation that was done prior to another board meeting regarding the appropriate dress code and school uniforms policies. As mentioned at that time, we're bringing back a plan of action for trustee consideration in this area, and following this evening, we'll begin to carry it out. As noted, we work in a variety of ways to support the dignity of all students in our schools, and one of the ways that we do this is by supporting a student dress code and expectations and uniforms that are reasonable and supportive of growth. We are proposing some revisions to these policies and to the procedures associated with them, but realize the importance of broad consultation in this area with a variety of advisory councils and also local school councils. While this policy was last updated in 2019, it is felt that some recent cultural changes are calling us to review it once again, and it is part of our overall 5-year cycle of revision. If you go towards the bottom of page 19, we're just highlighting the areas that we are proposing making changes to and highlighting our plans. So first of all, we are aligning 2 distinct policies and making them one so that there's an overall policy for this area with specifics outlined in the related gaps. What we're proposing are 50401, 02, and 03, secondary uniforms, elementary uniforms, and overall dress code expectations. We're proposing, as was mentioned again at the in-service for trustees, removing references to very subjective language such as modesty and the word appropriate, which can be defined differently by almost everyone who reads them. We are supporting our staff in schools by developing some guidelines for the enforcement of these dress codes, which again, we will seek community input on. We are continuing, and this is not an item so much for discussion, but it's a maintenance of an item. We're continuing to look at prohibiting any hate speech or images of hate, etc., in our uniforms or in anything that students may wear. We also know that from time to time, dress code expectations have been felt to exacerbate, in particular, anti-Black racism, and we want to ensure that that is no longer the case. And we want to continue to affirm that we will not affect our dress code in any way that does not support religious head coverings, for example. And finally, we are proposing lowering the percentage required for elementary schools to put in place a dress code to 60% from 75%. As mentioned as a possibility at the in-service session with trustees, our proposed go-forward plan is to review everything that has been shared with you this evening in detail through presentations by me at our various council meetings, and also to provide individual schools with a PowerPoint for them to show to their Catholic school councils and collect feedback from the advisory councils as well as from parents in schools, not only those who sit on the councils, but all parents through a survey. We propose to do this over the next 2 months, and once we have feedback, we will bring it back to the trustees for review and make recommendations with regards to whether to keep the changes that have been made or to modify some of them based on the feedback received from the councils and the parents. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Veccarino. For anybody who is online, if you can just message me in the chat, I'll add you to the list. Are there any questions here?
Yes.
Great, then. So Student Trustee Nathan Nguyen, please go ahead, please.
Through the chair, thank you very much, Superintendent Veccarino, for all the hard work you just did. On page 20, I just wanted to go back to gap 504.03, where we said staff maintain the prohibition on attire promoting hate, discrimination, illegal activity, profanity, and violence, and add prohibitions regarding negative political language and threats to health and safety. So I remember back on our information session we had roughly a few weeks ago. We also talked about just removing all political messaging in our dress code. Could staff also look into that, please?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the last three words in bullet 3, the negative political language, is in reference to that point that was brought up. We felt that to say, it could be argued that any statement of opinion is in and of itself political. So I don't wish in any way to make light of it, but "Go Leafs Go" could be perceived to be a political statement. So we chose the word negative political language. So, and I believe that it was actually Trustee D'Souza with whom this conversation was had to show that we would not tolerate our dress code in any way putting others down or making people feel lesser. So that was, but if it's felt that we could amend that language, we would be happy to do so.
Through the chair, thank you very much for the clarification. I just wanted to understand because, yeah, thank you very much, though. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bruno Inica. Then I have Trustee Daryl D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the next stage on this. We're going to, I heard a variety of different groups, but can staff go a little bit slower for me?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So the hope is for us to do a brief presentation to each of our advisory councils. So SEAC, CCCSC, our Indigenous Education Council, the Black Community Advisory Council, and Student Senate to review this information. During that 2-month period, we would also provide a PowerPoint to schools for principals to be able to share this information with their school councils, and we would send out a survey for all parents to complete if they wish to do so.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the 75 to 60%, why the change? Not disputing it, I'm just asking why the change.
So through the chair, it has not been attempted often. So not many of our schools have actually, in elementary, have asked to go to a school dress code or a uniform. But in the few that have, we've never actually reached 60. So it was just felt that that level of 75 was completely unattainable, especially because it is 75% or 60 if we make the change. And of course, it's only proposed, we can adjust it. But it's 75% of those who choose to participate in the survey in the first place, which means that disinterested people are automatically taken off the top.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm hoping that when the revised policy comes in, that should an elementary school achieve the 60%, that in the policy, it would state voluntary. Like if I'll give you an example, I'll pick school out of a hat, St. Timothy. The community of 500 people, 60%, 62% say yes, but the other 38% say no. That doesn't mean that the entire school has to go uniform. Because if that's the case, then it's going to cause some hardship. Maybe not for this school that I picked. It'd be a different school, but
yeah. So through the chair, 2 points. The moment, the way the policy is written at the moment, it would require, I'm just going to move this. The way the policy is written at the moment, it would require that everybody adhere to the dress code. We could adjust our language to say otherwise, and we could bring that forward to trustees for consideration in April. Point number 1. Point number 2, in terms of hardship, some other school boards, a board just east of us, does this sort of thing. There is not a requirement in elementary that people purchase formal uniforms. It's typically a white top and, let's say, a white top and blue pants, a gray top and blue pants, something like that. And schools, as they do in secondary at the moment, would make items of clothing either gently used and laundered and made available to families or not. But if trustees feel that it should be optional, we could entertain that language. That being said, the moment something becomes optional for some, it may not be a policy anymore that applies to the whole school.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not opposed to the policy. What I would not like to see happen is parent saying, I didn't want it. I'm not going to follow it. I don't care. And it won't be one per school. It might be multiple. And through whatever app that's on this, all of a sudden it becomes a group mentality and a bit of a challenge. I'm not going to say that that's going to happen, but considering some of the stuff that I've been through the last couple of weeks, likelihood of that happening, I would say, no, is
Through the chair, if I may, I think there's a couple of distinctions that would need to be made as we survey the communities around this. One is there's a distinction between a uniform and a standard dress. A uniform, which probably would be more expensive for families, would be embossed, school name, etc. But schools may want to go down the path of we just want a standard dress, which is we're choosing these 2 colors or these 3 colors. And, you know, maybe it's a t-shirt with sleeves and a long shirt, etc. That can be purchased anywhere. So in terms of affordability for families, there's a wide range there. Families still have to buy clothes regardless. So, you know, we'll make that distinction. If schools want to go down that path, then this is called a standard dress. This is not a uniform. It might also be something that we, during the survey, so Max, take note, to maybe probe that with parents. If the school did reach the 60% threshold for either a uniform or a dress, how do you feel about that, right? Like, should everybody comply, or should there be some kind of latitude for those that are not interested in complying? So it would give us that sense going forward, and maybe for schools that are conducting that kind of survey to probe that with their community as well, because that would be important information to get back, right? So if All Saints, for example, was surveying their parents around a standard dress, for example, the question to the parents would be, are you interested in it? Yes or no? If the school does reach 60%, do you feel that all parents have to comply? I think it would be interesting to get that kind of information back from the community, because that would inform how that community wants to move forward.
If I follow up, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Director Mazzarato. It would be interesting to see the participation percentage between 2 schools, at least 2 schools of this board that I represent, probably no more than 1.5 kilometers, maybe 2, I'll say 2 kilometers apart, where one would be significantly better off than the other, almost the same population. So if we get a response rate of 50% from school A, 22% from school B, then the question becomes, did they have access to that survey? If the answer is no, that's kind of, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I think parents, I'll tell you, a couple of schools of this board that I represent, they're gung ho for it, 60%. Maybe they'll make it, maybe they won't. But there are parents that say, no bloody way, right? In the same school. That's the part that's the killer.
Right. And
So, and I understand, if I could, Mr. Chairman, sorry, Marianne,
No,
didn't mean to
that's
cut it off. I understand it could be Walmart special, right? Blue shorts, white t-shirt, or golf shirt. what's the other store that,
Old Navy.
thank you, right? Old Navy, same deal, right? That kind of shopping from an elementary perspective. I get that it's not gonna have, you know, and I'll tell you, I've been at council meetings where some parents have said, yeah, we'll have the crest. Hold on, hold on. You know, like now it's getting into the supplier aspect of things, right? So, okay, I'm good with the community being surveyed and things of that nature. I think it'll give us some insight.
Through the chair, yes, and in regards to response rates perhaps being different depending on the accessibility, I think that, again, there would be some really clear messaging, especially to the principals, around the importance of understanding your community, understanding how they access information, and that it may not be a one size fits all. You may need to do a paper kind of version for it, or you may need to ensure that you've provided access at the school for individuals to complete the survey. Sometimes parent-teacher interview night is a great opportunity to solicit that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. I have trustee Daryl D'Souza, trustee Bria Corbett. Is there anybody else? None? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, the same topic of uniforms. We have approximately, 120 elementary schools right now, and I think a 60% acceptance rate across the 120 schools. What if we get it from 110 schools, 10 schools don't get? What happens?
So through the chair, my personal feeling is that most of our schools will not even engage in this process. In my 6.5 years in the role that I'm currently in, we've only had 2 schools request to go this route. Most schools are perfectly content with elementary school students wearing whatever they choose. If the council representing the whole school population feels that they'd like to begin that process, the moment they do, they contact the research department, and the researchers support them every step of the way, designing their survey, helping them with the collection of data, making some of the suggestions that Director Mazzarato just made. And as I said, even then, with the 2 schools that have come forward in 2 very different geographical areas of the board, the schools did not even reach the 50% mark. So there does not seem to be, at least not right now, there doesn't seem to be an overwhelming interest in our elementary schools to have a standardized dress code or a uniform.
You, Mr. Chairman. Second question was, is there a reason why we put add prohibitions regarding negative political language? Get to health and safety, I'm fine. Negative political language?
Through the chair, that was our way of trying to capture.
Because what's negative to you is positive to me.
So again, through the chair, that wasn't an easy point to land on.
Can we just eliminate negative and just say
Sure.
add prohibition regarding political language?
Through the chair, we could also look towards the Human Rights Code and the language in the Human Rights Code that talks about any kind of messaging or, well, I don't want to just say the Human Rights Code because that just talks about certain groups and protection of certain groups, but this should be about everybody. It should be, you know, language that can be perceived to, and I get it, those words are kind of judgmental. Give us an opportunity to work on that.
My recommendation would be just stick to, political. So whether it's positive political messaging or negative political messaging, we just avoid it.
Through the chair, we'll review that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Trustee Bria Corbett, is there anybody else? Seeing none, thank you. If just a reminder, if you can just please speak into your microphone. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And through the chair, can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you're fine. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you were asking me to speak through the microphone. Thank you. And through you, just so for elementary schools that want to consider this standard of dress versus the uniform per se, I think where some schools have encountered some issues, and even if it's a color, and it sounds simple enough, navy, white, would that mean that the children can't wear something that has a logo on it or a brand name on it, or because I think if it's required to be a plain white shirt and plain navy pants, I think you're going to have financial concerns for families, and because they will have to go out and buy non-logoed, non-named items.
So through the chair, having received some feedback from the two schools that attempted this process last year, the points that were just made are some of the ones that were made in those schools, which ultimately kept those schools from deciding to move forward. As I said earlier, it seems to be that, at least in the elementary grades, most parents are content with their kids wearing whatever they will to school. So this is just an option made available to them, which we don't anticipate a lot of take up on at all. Our only reason for suggesting lowering from 75 to 60 was because, as I said earlier, even 50 seems to be unattainable.
Thank you, Superintendent Max Vaccarino. And through the chair, regarding the 60%, we know parents and families typically, we get a low threshold with replying to surveys. Out of 100% of the school, if you only get 30% of parents respond to the survey, where does that 60% come in? Like, do you need 60% of the entire school parent community to respond and be in favor or support of that policy?
So through the chair, our reason for, and I hope I'm answering the question, and if not, please go back at me. Our reason for wanting to lower it a little bit, but not bring it right down to 50, was because we know that if it's 50 and you have, let's say, 49 and 51, what we've really done, unfortunately, is create a divided community, because 49 and 51 are too close together. So to try to respect a sense of making it more equitable, we lowered it, but didn't want it to be so low that it would become increasingly divisive. It's a difficult balance to strike. Yes, we do not have a great deal of parents who respond to surveys from time to time, but interestingly, in this particular area, and I'm only basing this on two schools from last year, parents did respond a little bit more than typical. And we assume that those who didn't respond either didn't have an interest either way or didn't want it. So that was good information for us too. And in one case, we did a follow-up survey guided through the research department to ensure that we were capturing parent voice. And in the end, the interest was not there.
Thank you. That's fair. And one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. But just before you do so, Trustee Corbett, just want to make a reminder, per our policy, please ensure that your cameras are on. If you're online, if you are not, if your camera is not on, then you'll be deemed as that you've left the meeting. It'll be noted in the minutes. Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Corbett.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through you, I had to check and make sure my camera was on. Does this policy around a secondary school uniforms, does it have language around adding a new piece to the existing uniform, or is this really around elementary looking at engaging their parent community about starting a new school uniform?
Through the chair, as was presented at the information session, definitely that component about adding, a blazer or a different kind of sweatshirt or whatever, that is definitely possible, and that has always been possible. But what we did do is formalize a little bit more the extent of the consultation that would happen within the community, so that in the case, for example, and this is purely hypothetical, a very small school council wouldn't be able to speak on behalf of a very large school without consulting more stakeholders. So we could and are happy to support through our research department a survey even of the entire school, and then of course, we don't force anyone to complete our surveys, but we definitely put it out to everyone to express an opinion, and then the school council would make a recommendation to the school principal, and the school principal, in consultation with the trustee and the family of schools SO, would help to bring that forward. And that is something that we have done in the past, and that is significantly more straightforward and more simple than the elementary issues we were speaking about earlier.
Thank you, Superintendent Vectorino, and through the chair. That's excellent. It speaks to the concern I had. I have students at a secondary school that I represent that have been advocating and wanting a school hoodie in the uniform, included in the uniform items, and we're just starting to consult with Catholic School Council and Student Council and whatnot. But my concern had been that in itself does not have enough reach if the parents of the entire school community have not had an opportunity to at least provide input, consultation. So I would very much and hope it's articulated in at least the policy or the gap around consulting with the survey to the entire parent community. I think that's important that you get parent voice as well as student voice, absolutely, and that parents have an opportunity to share their concerns either way, whatever item it is. Does that 60% threshold apply to that case with your adding an extra item to the uniform, or again, was that just more elementary with a new uniform?
Through the chair, the answer to the question is yes. This is something that we're going to be probing through the survey that we send out to parents. We did not attach a specific percentage simply because an additional item of clothing would in and of itself likely be optional. Because we would be looking to our Catholic School Council to advise the principal in that area, and there would be consultation with the trustee and DSO. So it was really meant to capture as much voice as possible. Additional items of clothing are not mandated. So we did not attach a specific percentage point, but we will be probing this additional item in our survey to parents.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Vectorino. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trustee Corbett. Trustee Daryl D'Souza, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, my question is, these gap changes are going to these 5 community councils for feedback. Now, my understanding is the gap is owned by trustees or it's owned by the community, not owned at all.
So through the chair, the policies are owned by trustees. We always bring our policies together with GAP so that trustees have full awareness of how the system operationalizes their policy. When we request input, we simply say, this is what we have now. This is what's being proposed. What do you think? And then we try to summarize all of that feedback, bring it back to you, and only then do we make changes to the policy and the related gap. I don't know if that answers the question.
For further clarity, though, the gap, which is an administrative procedure, is the way in which your policy is being implemented. So rather than talk about ownership, it's more important to talk about whether or not trustees have a comfort level around how that policy is being implemented in such a way that you do want to provide input into how it's being operationalized through the gap. So if you want to provide commentary or further input into what's being proposed in terms of how your policies being implemented, then that's the opportunity to do that. And sometimes you might also want to wait for that consultation. You know, it's important to have consultation from all those impacted. But once set, so once, you know, policy has been set and there's an agreement and you have a comfort level around how it's being implemented, then you entrust us to do that implementation.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Zarato. But my question is, these recommendations are going to 5 community groups in Duff and Peel, as well as to all parent councils across schools. Now, if 20% of them say, I don't agree with 50403, I want you to add something, I want you to track something. What's going to be our stand?
Well, again, I mean, that's information that you can use to determine. It's consultation, right? And consultation is important because you want to know how those that are going to be influenced by these decisions are going to be impacted. And so when that information comes back to trustees, that's for you to discern and decide, well, we got this kind of feedback on this particular proposed change. While we got that feedback, we still believe that it's in the best interest of the board, of this board, and as stewards of this board to continue to move forward with what we put out there. You might have one where you have an overwhelming negative response to, right? And again, though, even though you might have an overwhelming negative response, it doesn't necessarily mean that you reverse decision. You need to be able to explain why you're going to continue to hold that kind of position. But for the most part, when you go out and consult, I mean, you do want to be able to demonstrate that you're listening to what people are sharing with you, and then that gets reflected in your policy and the advice that you give to staff around solidifying those gaps.
My only concern was there could be a lot of additions to uniform policy. I hope not, but there could be. And once you consult and get that back into this horseshoe, questions that could arise is like, we told you, this is what we wanted. You all did not do it.
Well, again, through the chair, as long as you're able to provide a rationale for why you didn't include it, right? Like oftentimes you do seek out consultation and you get feedback, and you either listen to that feedback, or if you're not going to listen to that feedback, if you're able to provide a rational response as to why you don't believe it's in the best interest of this board to go that way, I think we all acknowledge that not necessarily everybody agrees with everything that we do. But that's always the risk, not risk, but that comes with being more consultative and transparent with the communities that you represent, is that you're going to get opinions that might be desperate opinions in terms of being diverse. But at the end of the day, as a board of trustees, you're going to make a decision that's in the best interests of all students in this board. And as long as you can be able to demonstrate that that's what's driving your decision, you know, you're going to make some people happy and some people not.
my thought, this was 504.02 is something that should go to all schools. Apart from that, anything above 504.3, those are the basic dressing etiquette that we expect as different fields. The O2 part is something that has to go because it's going to impact pockets of 1,000 kids.
Um,
Anything above that, which is clothes that you wear shouldn't have anything political or you need to dress modest, or except your head coverings if it's religious. In those are basics. There's no consultation on that. It's like this is what we expect you to do. 70% and 75 reducing to 60. Yeah, that should go absolutely. The other should be information. You know what? This is what we're doing. Not we're going to ask you, should we do?
Right, through the chair, Trustee D'Souza raises a really good point. Why are you going out and consulting on items that as a board of trustees, you've already agreed that these are non-negotiable items? And, you know, to your point, 504.03 should be a non-negotiable. It shouldn't be something that you're really consulting over. So if you'll allow staff to maybe take that back and identify, here are the items that really should be information items, to say the Board of Trustees have agreed that these are items that they believe are not going to be open to any kind of consultation and input, because they're really driven by really what's in the best interests of pursuing human dignity for all, for example, right? So let us, a very good point. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Trustee Bruno Nika.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I was intrigued by the comment that my colleague, Trustee Corbett made, that the negotiations or their conversation about a hoodie. I share three schools with three other colleagues. Each one of them have a hoodie. I don't understand why, if I'm going to introduce a hoodie, my choice as a father or a parent, either choose it or not. I don't know if, and a parent has the right to decide to buy one or not, depending on affordability, depending on a variety of different things. I'm not sure why some of our schools are going through this process when a uniform, I'll use a hoodie as an example, is part of, I don't know about the other 20 other, well, at least I know of one that has to negotiate it, but I'm not sure why there's that inconsistency.
Through the chair again, Trustee Inika raises a really good point around the inconsistency that we're seeing in terms of local decisions and how those local decisions are arrived at. The intent of updating this policy is to bring more consistency to those processes and some guidelines around that, and to actually provide some central direction so that we don't see this kind of inconsistency that we're seeing going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trustee Nika. Any other questions? None here, none online. Oh, sorry, Trustee Mario Piscucci, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody for putting your input on this one here. I got a couple of points I'd like to bring forward, if you don't mind. And sorry, I'm working off my cell phone. My computer's down. Number one, recognizing this is a matter that has been brought forward and has been brought forward many, many times. We're in a different time zone, time life right now. A couple of things I have to talk about. It's going to be haphazard. It's going to be all over the place, but I just want to pull it together. The very first thing is the idea of children playing mean to other children that can or cannot afford uniforms. we know that the question of dollars is always going to come into place. But children can be very, very mean. And the fact of the matter is that I don't have one, or my child can't have one, whatever. I can't afford it, whatever. It becomes interesting where they're going to start defending themselves. And as a result, I can see a little bit more bullying, if you will, on this particular item. Now, have-nots, that's fine. We have St. Sophia, I don't know, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the director. St. Sophia has uniform, does it not? Technically, do you remember?
Through the chair, yes, they do.
Yes, they do. And there's the relationship there is built around the Byzantine Rite. So that's one of the things happening. So the idea of settings, et cetera, and 60%, as far as I'm concerned, is a little just too low. But I understand 67% is the happy norm, seems to be when how many people like versus don't dislike. I like using the number 67 for that reason, because there is a balance to that. But anyway, so back to what I said, the pushing or the shoving around, et cetera, number one. Number two, if a child goes from one school to another school, their uniforms, are they going to be grandfathered, or do they have to buy another uniform? That's something that happened in one of our high schools, and everybody was told to buy a new one for the next year. It blew up in the face of some people, and as a result, it was not really well accepted. But the idea of grandfathering uniforms is a concern. The second, another point I'm concerned about myself, and I don't know if anybody has an answer to this. I never was able to get an answer. I'd like to get an answer, if I may, through you to the director. But who owns the logos? Right now, I believe Holy Name of Mary, the logo at one time was owned by the sisters. I don't know, I could stand to be corrected. But the fact of the matter is, who owns the logo? Who is the design? Who is the owner of that logo? And then the question is, do we get to use it wherever we want, let alone the logo? How about the Pantone colors that are involved as well? So we don't have an answer to that. What about the idea some school councils are going to say, we're going to raise some money for children who cannot afford a uniform. And as a result, they're using non-board funds, and for an issue that they're not really using it for, what the general population wants to use it for, because now it becomes a push on that particular source of money. The fact of the matter is that from a school board funds perspective, do we have enough money to have school council buy things? And to me, buying things, or even just the idea of chocolate events and all this kind of stuff, that's another form of taxation as far as I'm concerned. But going back to what I said earlier, the idea of using non-board funds potentially because they want everybody to be in the same uniform, is it going to be problematic? The idea for the thing is that I would like to make a quick round. I'm setting up appointments for the next couple 3 weeks before we do anything, and it seems like it's going to go back right now. But I'd like to have a discussion with my school councils, and that become a point that is directed by staff to say this topic must be discussed, and then see what happens and check the temperature. Because this is, I don't know why we're trying to find things to have issues about. They find us anyway. And in fact, what we're doing is we're creating ourselves another problem that may not even be a problem. But I understand, because I've been on that receiving end where people said, well, isn't the uniform going to be nice? Yes, but, and eventually it peters out anyway, because there's no discipline. And not that I'm recommending police discipline, but there's no discipline. There isn't anybody really pushing it, et cetera. And eventually just waters down itself what a uniform is. And then we're back to where we are today on February 21st. So it's being an operational issue as well. I can see, in terms of elaborating on this, I can see the principal doing other things that are a lot more important than worrying about who's going to wear a uniform. And if they turn around, they say, no, we're not going to do that. The idea, and I think it was touched on by another trustee, and basically what's going to happen, they're saying, we're just going to work with it, and people start complaining. And then we'll say, something, is it really worth it? This movement, and I'm almost finished, Mr. Chairman, this issue is not just a one-year issue. It's going to be every other second or third year issue. New generation comes in, JKSKs, and it's going to happen again. At one point, I can just see this just peter out itself, and then we don't have an issue. But my biggest concern after all this input here, et cetera, is the idea of dollars and cents and who owns the logo and who can tell us what to do with it. And when it comes down to push and shove, et cetera, why do I want to have another problem find me? I've got other problems that are a lot more concerned in terms of budgets and what have you. So at that point, Mr. Chairman, thank you very, very much. If anyone wants to add, it's fine. If not, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Trustee Mayor Pascucci. Madam Director?
Through the chair, just want to provide some responses to Trustee Mario Pascucci's commentary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair.
First of all, why do it? I would say not so much, it's not like there are a number of schools at the elementary level that are knocking down the doors saying, when can we have school uniforms for elementary students? So in that regard, I agree with you, and all that's being proposed even to deal with that is, you know, whether or not you want to lower that threshold a little bit. But as referenced a number of times here this evening, there aren't a lot of elementary schools that have an appetite of going down the road of a uniform. But I would suggest that we do need to bring more clarity and more consistency to how decisions are being made at the secondary level around uniform pieces. This updated gap intends to cover that off so that we have some consistency in how those decisions are being made and expectations around processes for making those decisions that would reflect broad consultation as referenced by Trustee Bria Corbett. I would also propose that we do need to provide more clarity to our schools around what our expectations are just generally in terms of standards of dress. It's not an issue at secondary because they have uniforms, although from time to time they do have civies days. But as fashions change, sometimes we're a little bit challenged by what those expectations should be. And so the intent of this process is to bring some updated clarity to the system around what's expected and what will not be tolerated. In terms of going around and just bringing your school councils up to date, especially for the trustees, certainly in general, just to say there's movement afoot to update the policy and the associated way in which the policy gets implemented. But it would also be staff's intent to provide trustees with a summary document, guide, etc., that will help you to bring those conversations to your school councils to just give them a heads up that this is coming. And so, you may want to wait until we can get that guide together for you that will help provide some clarity, because as we heard this evening from Trustee D'Souza, there are certain things that really are not going to be negotiated or consulted on because the trustees are pretty clear and aligned in what their expectations are around some of these things. And there's others where it would be an opportunity to provide input.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Director. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Director Mazzarato, is there a recommendation for the board? I don't see anything there.
Through the chair, no, this was only for receipt. Again, staff have taken the input from trustees here this evening, and we'll begin to finalize some guides that will help to inform this process going forward, with the intent of coming back to the trustees for some policy approvals.
Thank you very much. On to, and thank you very much for the report. H1, policy 4.04, educational excursions. Superintendent Goss.
And through the chair, the Dufferin PO Catholic District School Board is committed to providing students with the opportunity to participate in supervised activities and excursions occurring outside the physical school. The report this evening summarized recent review of GAP 801 in terms of the application of staff ratio for out-of-school events, as well as associated revisions. So Dufferin PO Catholic District School Board Policy 4.04 and GAP 801 sets out considerations and requirements related to out-of-school activities and excursions to ensure student access, learning, and safety. Trustees expressed a recent concern that students were not supervised in situations in which Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board excursion leaders fell ill or needed to attend to or accompany an injured student to access emergency medical care during a sports excursion. In response, the staff reviewed GAP 801, noting the following changes. So if I could draw your attention to page 27, one of the items that was changed was item 1.12, making it clear that supervision ratios of out-of-school activities or excursions, staff added rehearsal and performances to this as examples of excursions. Furthermore, we looked at page 43 that has a graph that shows exactly what the minimum supervision ratio for each grade and type of excursion, noting that more supervision may be necessary depending on individual student needs and the nature and location of the excursion and events. 7.3.1 is a revised supervision ratio for extended excursion for intermediate students traveling outside of Ontario. This new supervision ratio replaces that the point of not recommended classification for a type of excursion with this age group. Additionally, 7.3.2 indicated that the supervision may be augmented by parents and guardian volunteers, of course, with valid criminal reference checks, including vulnerable section. A new section that was added is on page 46, section 7.5. And it is a new section that staff added to provide protocols for emergency supervision when a lone excursion leader from a school must depart to attend to an ill or injured student or to add their own medical emergency. So if you take a look at that, where possible, each excursion should have 2 excursion leaders at minimum. However, there are times when there are only 1 excursion leader and these that accompany student on an excursion. That leader should identify 2 students upon arrival, any of the following individuals who may supervise a student in case of emergency. So that would be a staff member that is a member of the Dufferin Peel staff that is attending the excursion, or maybe a parent or guardian volunteer who has accompanied the group as well, or a convener or a coach of where they are hosting. So that would be an expectation on the excursion leader. Another instance where a single excursion leader, they may be departing an excursion to attend a medical need of an ill student or an injured student, the excursion leader shall immediately contact the principal or designate of the school for directions and identify 1 person that would be available to come when called upon. So we have put these things in place to ensure that at no point throughout the time that the excursion is taking place, that there would not be adequate supervision for students, or at least a connection back to the home school. So we have looked at these ratios. We are understanding that as we increase the ratio, it increases the cost of each of these excursions. And for that reason, we have been quite prudent to ensure that the ratio is consistent with both in and out of the province as needed. And at this point, I'm open to any questions that the trustees have.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Goss. Are there any questions? Trustee Bruno Inica, any other questions? None, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately or unfortunately, I raised this because my son was on a school trip coaching, got hit in the eye with a stick, the butt end of the stick, which caused other damage. But the concern that I have, besides that, was the fact that, and if I go back to the numbers that staff spoke to of it was 43 or 6. Staff just mentioned exactly what I would be concerned about as well. So if grade 9 to 12, I'm outside of the province, and I have 2 males and 2 females. Of course, if it's a girls' volleyball team, then it would be 2 and 2, 2 females. I mean, right? Just logic. I just want to be sure. I agree. I like this. I really do. Only from personal experience. Staff hit the nail right on the head. It's a great thing to have. Thank you very much. Now it's the cost. Because if I'm going outside of Ontario and I'm going to Italy, I'm carrying 30 kids. Now have 12 people, right? 1 for 10, 30, 4 times 3, 12.
No, sorry, through the chair, if I may, it would be 2 females and 2 males. That so if we,
Period.
yes,
It's not bad, but it's not that bad. Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, trustee Unica. Are there any other questions? If they pass the chair over to trustee Daryl D'Souza, please. Thank you. Fine. Section 6.5.1 on page, I don't know where it is. Page 40. Yes, page 40. Regarding taxis, there's a line there, second from the bottom of that paragraph. The different PO approved taxi companies require their drivers to submit evidence of clear criminal reference checks. Are those reference checks provided to Dufferin Peel, or are they held within the company?
through the chair, all of our taxis have been approved and do have a criminal reference check and vulnerable. We use only one particular taxi service for all of our schools. Excuse me, and the vendors have been approved.
Through the chair, if I may clarify,
Okay.
it's the actual vendor that keeps the criminal reference check.
Sorry, the service provider, so the taxi
Correct.
company, ABC, whoever it is,
Correct.
XYZ, I don't know if
Through
there's
the chair,
ABC
that's
out there.
correct.
But yeah, XYZ, what does it matter? 1, 2, 3, whoever it is. Can we make sure that it does say in there, because I don't see it there, that there's a vulnerable sector check as well? Within
the
the
chairs, we
policy, because I only see criminal reference check. We require our parents who are on site to have a vulnerable sector check as well.
Through the chair, I will ensure that I put that up.
Thank you very much. If it's already there and I missed it, please let me know. Through you, Mr. Chairman, regarding supervision for overnight excursions or out of province excursions, is that housed in this policy? And is there a metrics or a way that these supervisors, these teacher supervisors are picked? Is it, if you know the person who's doing the excursion, is it a lottery system? You know, you put your name in if you want to do it or not.
Through the chair, may I ask for a clarification? Do you mean overseas excursion?
Yes, overseas.
Okay, so overseas excursion, usually there's always run by staff of a particular school. So one of the teachers will come forward to the principal and say, I'm interested in going on this excursion. They will present it. And it's usually the teachers that are on staff. We usually don't have a lot of teachers that will step forward to take students on an excursion like that, because it is a big responsibility and they find it very difficult. So I've been doing this for a number of years and we've never ever had a lottery, because we really do many times have to go and ask if the staff would accompany a group of students overseas.
The reason why I asked that question is I don't want to have an individual who's putting this forward, gets it approved, and then them and three of their friends get to get a vacation and not vacation with work, obviously, but get to go see, Europe for a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. I'd like, if there's a staff member that's not part, who wants to go, is not willing to put, to put it forward and actually do the whole work on it originally, to put it together, whoever staff gets an option as well. To get the option to go out there. They may not be saying that I want to go out there, but if they're given the option, and it's not like just one person with three of their friends, staff get to go. I'll say vacation, but I know it's a working vacation. I've been on a number of trips for school. And I know the teachers there were working very, very hard. But I wanted to be open to all staff and not just have a handful of staff that get to do it themselves. Is there any way we can codify that within the gap?
Through the chair, maybe allow us to do some inquiries with the schools as to how decisions are made around who accompanies students on the trip. And based on what comes back around that, then it could certainly inform whether or not we need to articulate that in the gap.
Thank you very much. And just one last question, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the criminal reference checks and vulnerable sector checks, remember there was a question before, it wasn't in bylaw. I think it was in a board meeting or ANF or whatever it was, meeting faith and program. Are those reference checks and vulnerable sector checks, are they free to parents who want to volunteer? And can we confirm that? Because I've been told both that they aren't and that they are.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can respond to that question. Anybody who is engaged in volunteerism now has access to a free criminal reference check.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the reason why I asked was I thought parent mentioned that it was on the Peel Police website that there is a cost to it. So I don't know if there's a way that we can ensure that the information is correct.
Sorry, I ought to have been more clear. I apologize. So the CRC, the criminal reference check, there is no charge for it. The vulnerable sector screening does have a charge associated with it. Often schools, especially schools who are seeking volunteers, offer to support in that area, but potentially not always.
Thank you. And to you, Mr. Chairman, the reason why I ask is, again, parents were telling me both ways. Obviously, it makes sense now. But we find that that's during the barbecues that I attend, and I'm sure other trustees attend as well. We always try to promote Catholic school councils. And some of the issues are, well, you have to pay for the reference check. Well, yes, that's sort of a hindrance. So I don't know if there's a way that maybe the ministry can who wants to have more parent involvement and help foot the bill. Yes, for the vulnerable. Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the question, coincidentally, the next report is actually on criminal reference checks. So we'll get to some of the details
But I'll
in a
hold my
moment.
questions for next time.
But I think it's fair to say that schools who need volunteers have always gone out of their way to help. I happen to be the senior team rep with the police. The police in times when they're needed are also, they facilitate them, and from time to time don't charge us for the criminal reference checks or the vulnerable sector screening. The one place to go to make them entirely free would be the province. So that is something perhaps that I can bring up personally in my conversations with police.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions to this point? Seeing none, so Director will be deferring the approval of this policy. Because there was an approval on the end.
Through the chair, just for clarity, we're talking about H1.
Each one, yeah, education.
Right. Through the chair, I'm looking for clarity. It is there for approval. I know that there was a question around whether or not we need to codify how staff are selected for excursions. If you want to defer it, I suppose, but really that really is more a day-to-day management that would be.
The clarity, my assumption was that needs to be mentioned in the document for approval.
Okay, so
Not-
if trustees want to be assured that, then let us bring it to the February board meeting. We'll try and gather that information and make those adjustments. So there's no need for approving here this evening then. We'll take it back.
To Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the report. On to H2, policy 7.12. Access to DPCDSB properties. Again, Superintendent Pellegrino.
Who has now conveniently lost his place. I'm so sorry. Continuing through you, Mr. Chair, as just mentioned, the next report and the next two reports actually are both related to some of the topics that we were just discussing. In an effort to keep our schools continuously as safe as possible, one of the items that we review on a regular basis is who has access to our properties. This is reflected in policy 7.12, access to DPCDSB properties. It has an associated general administrative procedure, which we will be discussing this evening, criminal background checks, vulnerable sector screenings, and offense declarations. It has been reviewed and updated for your consideration. 7.12 was recently updated and did not require any changes be made to it specifically this evening. So this is what I have sometimes referred to as a cleanup item. We are clarifying our language. We wanted to ensure that it was clear to everyone who read it, the process that we undertake as a board for screening those individuals who are who enter our facilities and what their access is, and to ensure that it is up to date. In particular, we wanted to ensure that current practices regarding our criminal background checks with vulnerable sector screeners were highlighted, and the type of visitors that would have access to DPCDSB facilities and which forms of the criminal reference check they would require. That report begins on page 76, and the chart, and Principal Boyley is here with me this evening. Appendix A actually outlines the requirements associated with the various categories of individuals and groups accessing our schools. The version of the document that highlights changes begins on page 86. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Line. Trustee Luz Rosario, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, I was a little confused, so much to read. Where does, okay, will the Rosary Apostolate fall under faith and morals topic presenter, or another section, community partners?
So through the chair, yes, the Rosary Apostolate would fall under the category of faith and moral topic presenters.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a quick follow-up. I think you're aware that I have had a few Rosary Apostolate volunteers that tried to come into a couple of my schools and in another school's trustees area. And they were questioned on their police check. So why was there a confusion? Who do they give their actual vulnerable police check and everything? Because at one point they that they gave it to the sister.
Through
Could you
through the
just
chair,
clarify?
the Rosary Apostolate attend our schools, but they also provide a program of recitation of the Rosary, which is what we've tried to streamline through this process. I will ask Principal Boyle to provide some details in this regard.
Hello, and through the chair, thank you. I'll do my best to answer the question. So it would be through the faith component, but the way we kind of handled the situation with regard to the criminal reference checks is if the archdiocese is maintaining their criminal reference checks, similar to what we discussed with the taxi cabs, the separate company would be keeping that. We respect the archdiocese. But if it's faith related, but the archdiocese is not maintaining their criminal reference vulnerable sector screener, then we qualify it as under the same procedure as a volunteer in the school. And then they would provide that to the school principal in the same fashion. If it is, we do have a mechanism as well for annual declarations for volunteers. So it would be, if it hasn't been done previous, it would be a one-time event. And then if that same volunteer was coming to the same school on an annual basis, then the school principal would be able to facilitate it in the same fashion they would with any school volunteer.
Okay. I think that's where the confusion, and through the chair, I think that's where the confusion came about, because they thought that they had done it. One said that they had it 3 years ago, and he had completed the attestation and has given it to the sister. So that's where I was totally confused, because I thought the principal gets the provide the attestation and gives it back to the principal. Is that correct assumption?
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Trustee Del Rosario. In the case of the Rosary Apostolate, I don't want to say unequivocally, but I believe Sister Mary Elena collects the vulnerable sector criminal reference checks on the part of the Rosary Apostolate, and that they would therefore do the yearly attestation. It would be outside, the purview of the principal. So if you'll give us an opportunity to take that back, I'll call Sister Mary Elena tomorrow to confirm that and send a note to trustees and issues and events. But that's what I believe does happen, just in my recollection of the program from the past.
Okay, I would really appreciate that, Associate Director Amaral, because there's just different volunteer from Rosary Apostolate that had come to me and asked different questions. They said this school accepted them and then the other school did not. So there's a little bit of confusion going on around there, and I would really like to have some clarification. Thank you.
Chair, we'll get that for you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Associate Director, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Trustee Diogo D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I just wanted to clarify, and Associate Director Amaral beat me to it. So yes, so Madalena does collect all the documentation, including the criminal check and the vulnerable sector check, and we maintain it centrally in Scarborough. So yes, when these 5 of my parish schools have the Rosary Apostolate going there, and seamless because checks are already done and it's maintained centrally by Madalena, who reports to the Archdiocese of Toronto. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trustee Diogo D'Souza. Are there any other questions? Trustee Brunica, go ahead, please.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, does everybody have, I know everybody has a criminal reference check, but does everybody have vulnerable? I don't remember ever doing it, to be quite honest with you. I do, every year I get a reminder. This year I got it, say, a couple of weeks ago, and I did it right away because sometimes I have to get a reminder again. But this time I got it, but I don't recall ever doing one of those vulnerable check.
So through the chair, what we complete every year is simply an attestation that there hasn't been any violation since the previous year. You are attesting to the fact that the last one that you actually received is still devoid of any charges. I can't speak for anyone else, but if the last one that you had a vulnerable sector screener, you're continuing to attest to that. If it didn't, you're continuing to attest to that. So if you don't have a vulnerable sector screener in the first place, then you still wouldn't have one. So in the case of the average teacher, for example, they probably haven't had a criminal reference check since they became a teacher. They're simply attesting that the original one that they submitted at the beginning point of their employment continues to be devoid of any charges.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I know it just says, is it not so many words, but is it the same? Yeah, check it off, do whatever I have to do from a signature perspective, electronic signature, and send it back. I don't recall, but okay. Appreciate it.
So through the chair, what's required for people in the education sector is the vulnerable sector screener in addition to the criminal reference check.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, there is a recommendation on page 77 that the Board of Trustees approve and adopt the revision policy 7.12, access to DPCDSB properties as amended. I have a mover, please. Trustee Bruno Inica, sorry. Trustee Dira D'Souza, sorry. Someone approve it? All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Thank you very much. H3, looks like the Max Pecorino show today. Policy 35.00, external presenters in Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board. By Superintendent Pecorino. Go ahead, please.
Continuing through you, Mr. Chair. Again, as part of our work to ensure that our schools offer students all of the best possible services and supports that they can, Dufferin Peel has put in place an external presenters protocol, and that's meant to our ability to be able to enrich everything that we do, of course, aligned to our vision, our mission, and our strategic commitments. This protocol outlined in policy and procedure is fairly new, but there were a couple of items in it that, again, to use the phrase that I've used in the past, needed some clearing up. We wanted to ensure that it was clear in every aspect of all that we do. As I said, that there's that alignment between our practices and external presenters, and of course, that we're adhering to the moral teachings of the Catholic Church. We have updated for consideration this evening, policy 35, external presenters in Dufferin Peel, as well as its related general administrative procedure number 525. The focus of the changes are few. It was important to us to clarify the definition of an external presenter. We've updated it, especially because we wanted to make it clear when we were requiring insurance of our external presenters, when we were requiring the vulnerable sector screening, as was just mentioned, and also wanted to update some outdated language. And that is being brought forward for consideration this evening. As I said, a minor item, mostly some cleanup points. Happy to take any questions. The report begins on page 97 and the changes are highlighted thereafter.
Thank you very much for the report. So just to confirm, there are no recommendations. May have missed them. Are there any recommendations?
Yes, on page 98.
Oh. That's the page up next. Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, that the following recommendation be provided for consideration, that the Board of Trustees approve and adopt revised policy 35.00, external presenters, Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board as amended. Mover, Trustee Thomas. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. On to H4. the rescission of GAP 603.00 communication. Sorry, Madam
Through
Director.
the chair, we've just noted that the wording of the motions are identifying that the Board of Trustees, they really should say that the Bylaw and Policy Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees. So with your indulgence, where that mistake has been made, that we would change that in the minutes and what gets brought forward to the board in February.
No problem with that. Thank you very much, ma'am. I was reading it. It sounded a little weird. Thank you very much. So we'll see that for every recommendation. H4, rescission of GAP 603.00 communication, inclusive language guidelines, Superintendent Veccarino.
So through you, Mr. Chair, and no worries about the language in this particular recommendation, it's fine. This item is being brought forward for rescission because although as a system, we work very carefully to ensure that our language is always inclusive. This particular general administrative procedure, which was first published in 1988, so it is a very old item, is being recommended for rescission because the language in it has now been the intent of the language in it has been included in Policy 12, which outlines our need to comply with the Ontario Human Rights Code. And also GAP 603 was outdated, and which is why we are petitioning to have it rescinded, because all of the stereotypes that it worked against were surrounding women's achievement and advancement in particular, as opposed to being the broader areas which are covered by the Ontario Human Rights Code. So it is outdated and it has been superseded by Policy 12. So it is redundant and it is being recommended for this committee for rescission. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, recommendation that the Board Bylaw Policy Review Committee recommend to the Board of Trustees the GAP 603.00 communication inclusive language guidelines be rescinded. Trustee Bruno Nika, thank you very much for moving that. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Thank you very much. On to I, there are no notices of motions. On to J, questions asked by trustees. I'll start a list. Are there any questions to be asked of by trustees? Trustee Bria Corbett. Anybody else? Go ahead, Trustee Corbett.
Thank you. And through the chair, just a question regarding, so we've provided to the system some guidelines for consistency for Catholic School Council meetings and the platforms to use, the agenda guidelines, the policies around keeping the minutes updated on their websites and all of that. My understanding is the schools have been given some leeway or time to transition into making some of those changes. What are we looking at for a timeline to make sure the schools are operating the Catholic School Council meetings on a consistent basis?
Through the chair, it would be our expectation by September that we have full implementation and consistency across the system. We understand that there are schools that found it very easy to make that transition and didn't require more time, but we also understand that there are other schools that require more time. So we are providing that kind of extension to allow for them to adopt to the new expectations that have been identified. And I know as well that through the leadership of Superintendent Chiliano, who has responsibility for that portfolio, there will also be some updates to the central binder that would also include some direction to all school councils around what can be included in bylaws, local bylaws, and what shouldn't be included in local bylaws to ensure that we do have that consistency across the system. So we are in a bit of a transition period, noting that there are some schools that were well prepared to move in that direction and others that needed some more time.
Thank you for the clarification and through the chair. I completely understand they're doing a lot and they need time to make some of those changes. For something like using the new agenda template, does that require waiting until September?
Through the chair, I would say no. So if if there needs to be direction to the system around that, it was really more around trying to adopt to providing access to the meetings in a multimodal way that seemed to be providing some consternation, but around using the new template, I don't believe that that needs to wait till September.
Thank you. I would agree because included on that new template for the agenda, it has clarity in terms of how the every meeting should be operating, and so I think that would be helpful if that could be sent again to the schools to make sure they're all working from the same agenda, because that really shouldn't, in my opinion, take any time to prepare. It's already prepared for them. And then regarding using Zoom versus Teams, if they're already using a platform, do they require waiting until September to switch over to the new platform or any platform?
Through the chair, what we're working on through ICT, and I guess I should also identify that the schools don't have the kind of technological support that we would have at our meetings. Like we have personnel that run the virtual side of the meeting in the background, right? And so there needs to be an appreciation and understanding of that, and also ensuring the integrity of the meetings and that there isn't going to be any interruption. So we're working with ICT and providing directions to principals regarding the platform to be used and how they can establish settings, because we don't have like webinar licenses for every school. That would be very costly. And it might be a cost that schools don't necessarily have to incur, especially if they're not going to have a lot of uptake. But we do want the schools to feel confident in knowing how to set certain parameters in the platform that's being used to ensure that the meetings are not being disrupted. So that's where we need, some of them need a little bit more time. There are some schools that aren't even running where it's not a huge issue. They've already kind of navigated that. But regarding the agenda template, we'll ensure that that message is reinforced, that they should be doing immediate adoption of that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Bria Corbett. Are any other questions? Trustee Bruno-Nica, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, through you to staff, when organizations that have been around for a while send documentation to our parents to buy whatever, whether it be cookies, books, whatever it is, does anybody have a look at that information?
Through the chair, there may be some organizations that have a relationship with the school, and the expectation is that the principal should have an awareness of what's being sent around.
And staff investigate that. I think you sent out an email to all trustees about, without mentioning what it is, because I would mention the school, which makes it in camera. There's been a significant amount of conversation in one of the schools of this board. And according to the parent that I spoke to, there will be significant more concern. I just want to make sure that I know that when we talked about, actually at the time it was Superintendent Brunton and I talked about the human trafficking, the women that were human trafficked. when we did our check, staff did the check, they found that, one of them was not, didn't cut it, for the sake of a better word. And as a result, they were not able, or one of them was not able to, but the other two were, and they chose not to, which was fine because we ended up with two other young ladies that were able to speak to our community. But I'm not sure that I guess we're so used to accepting it that we don't, because we've been accepting it for so long. Now all of a sudden it's got something that has raised the eyebrows of parents, which has significant amount of concern. Not only the parents, but also like myself, and I know that in conversation with yourself, Director Mazzarato, a lot of concern from our perspective as well. And again, without mentioning more, I feel it would be of an in-camera nature based on the parent. So I'm hoping that staff could review any and all previous and any new items. Somebody should go through it. I don't know who, that would be staff's decision. But I think that we got so comfortable with a vendor that how bad can it be? Well, look at it, it's not quite to our Catholic standards. It's not to say that it is, I mean, again, it's not quite to our Catholic standards. So I tried to give the company a call today, and I didn't have enough time in the day to be bounced around, or for somebody not to be able to answer when this particular new entourage came out, entourage of items came out. I don't want to talk in riddles, but I think my colleagues get the email that the director sent out regarding this particular issue. So as long as I know that somebody's going to look at that, or somebody look at that, and maybe in a couple of weeks, whatever staff finds out, and put it in issues and events, and kind of let us know what the status is, because I will tell you, it caught me quite off guard, quite off guard.
Through the chair, yes, we'll follow up and provide a status update.
Thank you, Trustee Unique. Trustee Mario Pascucci, and then Trustee Gerald D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the director. Madam Director, about a year ago, I requested to find out what, basically in marketing programs that are out there, they say, some of these other companies say we donate so much money per school for whatever needed, et cetera, et cetera. I've never had a report come back to me on that one that I can remember. But funnily enough, I was in a local store the other day and it says all proceeds from, for this particular school, and they named the school, and it was a Catholic local high school. They said we are put forward so much dollars, and it's very commendable. Thank you very much. But I'm curious of how many other organizations are supplying some of our schools with money, or something in kind. And I'm not asking to the penny, but in fact, if they're doing something like that, because as I said a moment ago at another topic there, there's a way of paying off some of our debt that's in fact should be covered by the ministry. But I'm just curious, Madam Director, if we can find some information. Generally speaking, the question would be, I see it, does anyone ever receive money either expectedly or unexpectedly from outside organizations? And it's just one of those things I want to see if in fact it is that from a marketing perspective, if we're being used as a marketing organization, and sorry, as a tool for a marketing organization, and we don't, we're not aware of it, basically. Does that make sense, Madam Director? Is it possible to do something like that?
Through the chair, yes, we can assemble that information, but I will note that currently the trustees have a policy that doesn't allow for sponsorship, which would require us to advertise for a company.
Yes,
For example, if a company decides to say, I'm going to donate, equipment
yes,
to your school, but I want you to put up a sign that says this has been donated by such and such. So, but I'm hearing you around wanting to have a better understanding of whether or not our schools are receiving significant kinds of donations and where those donations are coming from.
and I'm not looking at merchandise only, I'm looking at dollars and cents, because what you're getting here, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is the fact is that you're getting schools with the haves and have-nots. And I know as a board, we work really hard to trying to get things back to the schools, and some trustees have done an incredible job of isolating merchandise that they sent through various methods to different schools. And that's incredible. That's fantastic. But it goes back to fairness. I mean, a school that is in one area of Mississauga versus another area of Brampton or Caledon or wherever, there might be a disassociated, there might be an unbalanced value of revenue, unbalanced revenue because of the source where they are in terms of who supports them, et cetera. I just want a handle on that. I mean, I was surprised the number of dollars that we had board handle in the non-board funds scenario. I'm wondering if we can look at this as well, because this, like I said, just to close off, it'll be a good number to have, just to balance out the idea of what it costs us or what costs the community to join our schools. I'm not looking for a report in the immediate future. You know, as it's just coming off this and we're getting into Christmas and Easter's and our budgets are all tight, et cetera. I'd like to get a report sometime. If verbal's fine, sometimes late April, early May is fine with me too. Or if you see it any other time, it's great, Madam Director. I'll leave it in your capable hands.
Thank you. We'll follow up.
Thank you, Madam Director.
Thank you very much, Trustee Mario Pascucci. Trustee Daryl D'Souza, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chairman. I had a conversation this morning with Julie with regard to reduction in the number of students in our board over the last few years. And I did check with her with regard to the number of staff, whether the staff has stayed static or there's a proportionate reduction in number of staff. To make sure that it's the minutes, because I have requested for a report over the last 5 years to show us the number of students in elementary and secondary, and then number of staff, the board, probably a breakup showing instructional staff, because we haven't closed schools in the last 4 to 5 years. So the administrative staff in the school or the operational staff in the school cannot be reduced because you require those basic minimum numbers to run a school. However, the instructional staff should be reduced by at least 1,000 students in that we reduce in a year. And that would be approximately 500 students for 2 elementary schools filled to capacity. And my understanding is an elementary school would have approximately 18 to 24 teachers in classrooms. Now, we are reducing the number of students by 1,000 every year. I wouldn't expect 48, 20, 24 teachers, 18 to 24 teachers to be reduced proportionately, because we merge classes, we merge grades, and there would not be that many classes closed across the board. Because the number of students leaving our board would be from different schools, and we're not merging schools. Just for my understanding, and I'm sure the fellow trustees would like to see, that we are reducing number of staff to natural attrition or whatever it may require, to ensure that the we are maintaining, we are staying in line with the reduction in our number of students. So that's a report I was just looking for. I thought I'd
Through the chair, staff can certainly work on that report, but I just want to provide some clarity towards how that report would have to be developed. When you talk about, like, there are very strict ratios around teachers and students. So as you reduce the number of students, it is going to reduce the number of teachers because there's a ratio and you're only funded that way, right? So certainly that can be demonstrated year after year. But then there are other staff within an organization and different levels associated that also would have been compounded by or impacted by whether or not through collective bargaining, additional staff, like custodians, for example, right? If there was an additional complement of custodians that was permitted, then that doesn't, what you might see instead over the last number of years is that even though you're reducing in the number of students and teachers in proportion to those ratios, you might actually have seen an increase in other staffing levels because of the ministry's focus. I think it would be important as well to be able to demonstrate the out of classroom staffing levels, right? So it makes sense that if you've lost 10,000 students over a number of years, are you seeing a proportional decline in the number of senior staff? Are you seeing a proportional decline in the number of other staff that we have that are not tied to a ratio? So it is a report that is going to have a number of layers to it. I just wanted to ensure that I identified that for you, Trustee.
For you, Mr. Chairman. And that's the reason why I said the instructional staff in a school would be between 18 and 24, reaching 500 students. The support and administration or operational staff would be 7 to 10. Those would not reduce. However, if 25 students have left a school, I would assume that one teacher would be reduced. That's what I'm looking at seeing.
Right.
So, I mean, whenever it's possible, if that report can come in news and events, that would be helpful.
Through the chair, yes. I need to connect with staff to see how much work is involved in that. You know, at the worst case scenario, I would say we probably need a couple of months for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none here, none online. On to section A, there are no declared interest items. Section L, in-camera session. So we'll be going to in-camera. Do we need some time?
Through the chair, you need a motion to move in camera?
So motion with the camera, Trustee Darrell D'Souza, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. Would a 5-minute, 10-minute break be enough?
5 minutes.
5
It's
minutes?
just a very brief update. Very brief update.
Okay, thank you. So you know what, we'll, at 8:50, well, it's 8:49 now, so 8:55, 8:55 we'll be returning. To all Evening and thank you very much if you stayed online. We are right, we have rising reports. The report is that we received a verbal report about a confidential matter. Can I have somebody move that, please? Trustee Bruno Nika, thank you very much. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, can I have somebody please move adjournment? Trustee Bria Corbett, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, again, thank you very much for everybody online who've attended this meeting. Our future meetings are on April 16th, 2024 and June 4th, 2024. Good evening, and we wish you all the best. God bless you.